Okay, everybody, if you could please take your seats, we're going to get started. It's time. We've got a lot of things to cover tonight, so let's have a seat. CAC members, please take your seats.
Here, I'm here front.
Hello?
Make sure you're sitting where your name tag is. John?
Do you mind horribly if I turn this around down?
Where your name tag is at some point in time. All right, everybody, good evening. Welcome to Butte County General Plan 2030 Workshop Series Meeting number 4-2A. And this is a meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee of the Butte County General Plan. And we've got a lot of work to do tonight. They have a lot of work to do tonight. So we're going to take care of some business and then we'll get this thing started. First of all, I'd like to welcome you all here. Welcome members of the public as well. Really appreciate everybody's effort. Tonight is the night and the beginning of the night I think everybody's been waiting for, to really get down and talk about the issues, stand toe-to-toe, express your perspective, express your opinion, and that's really what we're looking for tonight. So we're going to have a very good discussion. Just for the Citizens Advisory Committee members, you have a microphone in front of you. When you do make your comments, we want to make sure you pull the microphone, swing it over, get it in front of you so we catch what you're having to say. We record it properly, and we want everyone to be able to hear. Let's see. I would like to introduce, we have one of our members of the Board of Supervisors here, Supervisor Kim Yamaguchi. So I would like Kim to come up and say a few words. Oh, come on, say it. Okay. Well, Kim and the board is very supportive of the general plan process. And the board, as you know, has spent the last meeting that we had talking about the workshop series, spent about 9 hours on general plan issues. I provide an update to the board every Board of Supervisors meeting. I just gave report update number 30 this last meeting. So we continue to keep them apprised. We have issues coming up. And Kim here is a sign of support. Also, with the process, in order to allow you to stay focused, board members come and say hi at the beginning, but then they're asked to scoot out of here because you're going to get all this stuff later. And so anyway, he won't be hanging around, as you may see other board members in the future as well. They're going to come and say hi to you and greet you and let you know they appreciate all your work. So thank you, Kim, for being here. You may have noticed in the back, we have one of our General Plan newsletters, General Plan 2030 newsletters. If you read it, it says, ¿Qué es el Plan General 2030 del Condado de Butte? So we have our Spanish version of the newsletter available. Yep. You've been reading the Spanish one and you didn't even know it. And okay, well, good. All right, well, it's part of our outreach effort to get the word out about what's going on with General Plan 2030. And so that's available. If you could help us distribute those to people who would need a version in Spanish, that would be helpful. We have a Hmong version also in the process of translation, and that should be out soon. Let me kind of do a quick review for all of us, and so we're all understand the importance and the context of tonight. We've had a lot of meetings to date. You know, we've been at this about 1.5 years and longer if you go back to our Charting the Course meeting in March of 2006. So we've been heading towards tonight, actually. And it's all been about preparing you for tonight. We've had meetings. Many of you were at the City County Summit. We've done work on guiding principles back in February 2007. The General Plan 2030 briefing book, which is what we call the 70,000-foot view of the county. That overview has been a very helpful piece of information. The key issue summary, which was the outcome of workshop series 1-2. The setting and trends report, which is that, 1,100-page document establishing kind of the background, if you will, of Butte County as we start the general plan process. So it helps us with our environmental impact report. And it really is a wonderful document to read about Butte County in all areas. So that's been a resource that you've had opportunity to review, and so that you're very well equipped, you understand Butte County. Our final land use policy and transportation alternatives document, General Plan 2030 newsletter, and most recently the alternatives evaluation report. Again, a lot of information, the alternative evaluation report, and we have copies here if people need a copy. That document is extremely helpful to the process we're undertaking now with evaluating the 34 study areas, 31 of which are in the unincorporated part of the county, and using that information to help you discuss which study areas should go forward into the preferred alternative of Butte County General Plan 2030. Specifically, you've had several meetings as well. I won't go through all of them because many of you were there. Hopefully most of you were there. These meetings, though, again, were to equip you additionally, besides all of the information that I've outlined, to give you information about things such as the fiscalization of land use, low-impact development design, air quality issues, climate change, water resources, the Butte Regional Habitat Conservation Plan, Butte Regional Conservation Plan, sustainability, deer range, and wildfire issues. I mean, that's a lot of information that we've provided you, and that was for a specific purpose, actually two purposes. One is you asked for it. You asked for that information to help equip you for these discussions tonight. Second is that it really did equip you, and you're going to see the fruit of that tonight. And so it has been extremely important to lay that foundation. You're aware we've done a lot of outreach. Many of you were at community meetings that we've had when we went out listening to members of the more rural parts of the county, the unincorporated communities. We have 42 unincorporated communities in the county, and we went out to many of those and heard from citizens about their ideas, their issues, their concerns, what they like about their community, what things they would like to see changed. That information also comes into our process and helps. You're familiar with our workshop series. We're in workshop series 4 tonight, and that's where the work over the next 2 meetings after tonight, where in the end you will make a recommendation to the Planning Commission on the preferred alternative for Butte County's land use. And then we'll follow that up with a goals and policy discussion in workshop series 5, and then we get into the actual elements, housing element and zoning. So you've got a lot of key work ahead of you in 2008 and 2009. Again, here's where we are tonight with the alternatives evaluation and selection. The March 27th public outreach that began workshop series 4, we held that in Chico. We had about 120 people, 130 in attendance. We had a lot of county staff there, county department heads were there to help answer questions, to be a resource for all of you, for all the public who came. A lot of great input from that meeting. The alternatives evaluation report, again, what it did was it took these constraints that we wanted to evaluate on each of the study areas and each of the alternatives, and it took that information and it graded them. And that is designed to assist you in your discussion tonight. You might say, the reason I like this area is because it got an A in this area. The reason I don't like this is because it got a D in this area. So that's the kind of information that is intended to provide tools to you to discuss alternatives instead of just, I like this area, I don't like that area, I like that person, I don't like that person. We're trying to make this more objective in the process here. What's the best for the citizens of Butte County as we try to create a preferred alternative? That's the process. That's the project ahead of us. So what is next? Tonight's meeting. Tonight's meeting also is focused on the study areas around Paradise. We did send an original notice out for this meeting outlining our plans. We've been trying to keep our website up to date, to keep people informed, sending out email notifications to about 450 people who are on our email distribution list. We've done notices in the paper. We're not noticing each specific CAC meeting, but we think the outreach effort we're doing is sufficient to get all of you here, so that's good that you're here. On April 17th, we move to South County into Orville, and we will discuss the study areas in the southern part of the county around Orville, Gridley, Biggs. We've got a lot on that agenda, so it's going to be very challenging to get through all of that. Tonight, you're going to establish kind of your process for how you get through study areas and alternatives. And you're going to get refined as you move forward as we go to Orville and then on into Chico on April 24th for the North County study areas. The Planning Commission is scheduled for May 9th. I can predict we'll have another Planning Commission meeting after May 9th in order to get through all this information. And then July 29th to the Board of Supervisors for the board to adopt a preferred alternative for Butte County. We also have some other things going on. April 14th, next Monday, we have a meeting. You can read about it on the website. It's to prepare us for June 5th discussion about the organization of the general plan. And if you want more information about these, feel free to see one of my staff or me. Our website, buttegeneralplan.net, that's where we keep things current. And I can't tell you how excited I am for this meeting tonight. For all of you to have the chance to have the meeting you've been wanting to have for the last year and a half. This is the one. This is the time where you roll up your sleeves and you put out there your thoughts, your ideas, your opinions. We want your opinions tonight about study areas. And we will do our very best to capture the information, the discussion, as David, Tanya, Lisa walk us through this exercise tonight. So let me introduce at this time David Early, our lead consultant with Design Community and Environment. David's going to take it away. Dave.
I have one slide, but I don't know where it is. Okay, thank you, Tim, and thank you all for waiting while we figure out the PowerPoint here. I'm David Early with Design Community and Environment. It's great to be back after working back in the office quite a bit. I've been working a little, and Joanna Jansen and Tanya Sundberg and Lisa Katz have been working a lot to put together a very thick document that I know you all have had a chance to review now to document some of the impacts that would occur of the various development and conservation scenarios under the 3 land use alternatives we've put together. As you know, we have 39 study areas. 3 of them are in 3 of the cities that still have significant potential growth potential under their existing general plans, but 36 of them are areas that we're going to need to be considering over the next 3 meetings to get your input as to whether these areas should change or stay the same, and if they are to change, in what way. Tonight's agenda is before you on a piece of paper with the blue heading that's attached to a very thick packet of stuff. As you can see on the agenda, we're going to be doing some presentations that are intended to last till about 6 o'clock. We will then have time for your questions and answers from the committee. And then we do have a time for public comment from 6:20 to 6:50. We then would like to open it up for all of you as the committee to have a discussion about the basic principles under which you as individual committee members feel that you really want to be making decisions about the alternatives. I don't think necessarily that you're going to come to agreement on those principles. We're not asking you to try and come up with a set of principles that you all agree on, but we did think it would be very important for those of you who want to share some of your own thoughts about some of the principles by which you will be making decisions and giving input this evening. I know many of you have said that you feel that it's very important to have an overall understanding of the principles by which development and conservation should occur in the county. We wanted to give an opportunity tonight to have that discussion. Once you have had a chance for that discussion, then we are going to launch in for the last about 2 hours of the meeting and look at the first 7 of the study areas that we will be looking at through the course of these 3 meetings. There are 7 areas that are in the immediate Paradise area, numbers 5, 7, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 20. We hope to wrap up by around 9 o'clock or 9:15. And at that point, we will remind you again that there is yet another meeting next week in Oroville to continue the process and look at a much larger number of study areas that will be in the Oroville area. I did want to just say to the committee members and to the public who are here, and we welcome all of you as public, that this is intended to be primarily a CAC meeting. I've been asked to facilitate and will do so, and for most of the evening I'll be limiting the comment and discussion to members of the CAC. We have heard from the CAC through past meetings that it was very much desired that the CAC itself could have forums in which to discuss these issues among yourselves and to give your feedback and input directly to the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors. So that's what we're doing this evening. We will not be taking public comment at times other than the specific public comment section of the meeting that's from 6:20 to 6:50. Might vary a little all because we're a few minutes behind schedule, but that half hour will be the one time for public comment. When we start that time for public comment, I'm going to do a quick show of hands as to how many want to speak, and we'll limit the time for speaking accordingly to make sure that we really can fit it in within the half hour. I know that's a limited time, and I want to acknowledge that. But at the same time, we did have the public meeting on March 27th. CAC members were there as they saw appropriate. The CAC has, and all of you have, attached to your agenda, a pretty thick stack of input from that meeting on March 27th. CAC members got that this week in advance of the meeting and have been able to review that as well. So there have been a lot of opportunities for public input other than the half hour that we'll be allotting tonight. Tonight really is intended to be the time that all of you, as the CAC, give us comments, direction, and guidance. Tim already mentioned the one important housekeeping item this evening, which is that the microphones, which you have all moved away from the front of your faces, need to be put back in front of your faces at any time you want to speak. It's a relatively small room. Some of you may think you can be heard without the microphone, but that may not be true. And even more importantly, we are tape recording the meeting, and you will not be heard on the tape if you do not speak into the microphone. So I hope that I don't have to remind each of you every time you speak to put the microphone to your mouth, but we really do want to make sure we get you all on tape, and so we are going to be asking you to do that. I did want to go over just what the attachments are that are in the handout that you have this evening. This is all information from the March 27th workshop. There are 5 different attachments separated by blue sheets, and they are summarized with the table of contents on the second sheet right under the agenda. The first part is a summary of all the input that was received at the meeting, so it provides a summary format. We then have in part B transcripts of both the town hall portion of the meeting and notes taken by individual facilitators. We have notes that were written down on study area sheets, and we actually have a little mock-up of what the study area booths looked like at the workshop. The large sheet of paper with the 13 written on it and some handwriting is the kind of sheet that was available for every one of the study areas. The notes that were written on those 39 sheets of paper are summarized in part C. We then also have a written synopsis in part D of what people wrote on comment cards that were turned in at the meeting, and then the verbatim comment cards are attached at the end in attachment E. So you have all of that information to look at, and again, the committee members in particular got that information earlier this week and have hopefully had a chance to look at it. What we're going to do at this point then is that I'm going to turn it over to Joanna Jansen, who's going to give a presentation about the alternatives themselves and the process that we are undertaking right now. Once that presentation is over, I'll come back to help to facilitate answering any questions you have, and then we'll open it up for public comment before we get into your discussions. Joanna?
Thank you, David. Okay, I'm just going to run through what we did to evaluate the alternatives and produce the report that you all have tonight, and also explain what happened at the March 27th workshop that both Dan and David have, Tim and David have touched on now. The goals of the alternatives evaluation process were, what happened here? Oh, I think this show is in a slightly different order than the show that I have a printout of, so I apologize for that. Let's see, I think we can talk about it this way. It looks like this is a little bit earlier draft of the show, so I just want to apologize in advance, but I think we can work through it. Most of the content is the same. The alternatives evaluation process that we undertook to look at all of these study areas was conducted by DC&E, also by development services staff, and by a number of other county departments. DC&E's team included our economists, Bay Area Economics, Fair and Peers to look at transportation issues, and Jones and Stokes to look at biological and cultural resources. We had significant help from the Butte County Department of Water and Resource Conservation on our water analysis, and other departments, including Environmental Health, who helped us look at the wastewater analysis, the Public Works Department, who helped us look at traffic. So it was a very extensive effort to create and to review the information that you have in front of you. These are the topics covered in the report. You've had the report for a little while now, so I hope you're familiar with these topics. We put this up here so you can see the range of topics that the evaluation report considered. Everything from economics to airports to ag land, water and wastewater, biological resources, safety and hazards, and cultural resources. The goals of this evaluation are to help you understand the different alternatives that you're looking at and compare them. It is not at all intended to be a substitute for site-specific, much more detailed studies that would need to take place if any development in any of these study areas were to move forward. So I want to make sure that you understand that. This is really trying to give you a big picture sense of how these areas compare in the topics that we considered. And we put all of our findings together in the report that you have. The report hopefully is organized so that you can both quickly get a picture of the comparison by looking at the summary table in the front of the report and looking at the maps in the appendix, but also so that you can really investigate particular study areas in detail by reading that study area chapter. This is table of contents of the alternatives evaluation report. Again, you've had it for a little while, so just giving an overview of what's there and how the document is organized. Again, we tried to have a balance of both summary materials and more detailed explanatory materials. There were 3 basic inputs into the alternatives evaluation process, including mapping analyses like the ones you see on the screen here, research of existing documents. Obviously, we already had a lot of information and research that we had done as part of the Setting and Trends report, so we looked back at those kind of background documents. And we interviewed service providers for sheriff services, fire services, water and wastewater services to determine what kind of impacts they might expect to have from the different alternatives in these study areas. After we had done all that research and conducted the evaluation, we developed a 4-point scale to help you kind of quickly compare the alternatives, A, B, C, and D. The 0 score is used when the criteria are not relevant to that topic. So the example that I gave at the March 27th workshop was in the traffic and circulation topic. We looked at public transit. So if an alternative does not include any development, then it doesn't get a public transit score because there are no people living in that study area, so public transit's not exactly relevant to considering that. So that's the case when it gets a 0. In other cases, no development would have an impact. For example, in a site that's currently in agriculture, leaving it in agriculture would have received an A. So a 0 does not equate to no development. A 0 equates to not relevant to this topic. That concludes the alternatives evaluation portion, and now I'm going to talk about the public workshop that we had a couple of weeks ago on March 27th. I know some of you were there, but for those of you who couldn't make it, the format was organized as an open house session and then presentations and town hall discussion. So as David pointed out, we just brought some examples here. We didn't have our agenda doesn't allow us to do the same open house format tonight, but we brought examples of what was set out. There were both study area stations and issue stations for people to look at. I'm going to talk about each of those in a second. And then the town hall discussion where people shared ideas and suggestions, much like you are going to do here tonight. The open house format also, which we had an open house for 1 hour at the beginning of the evening, then we had some presentations, the town hall discussion, and then we had another open house for an hour later in the evening. The open house included a how-to station where people could understand how to use the room and understand the materials that we were presenting, get an agenda, ask questions, etc. The land use alternative summary station, which is this here showing the maps. This is a table showing acreages, dwelling units, and commercial square footages under each of the alternatives in each of the study areas. You have that as part of your report. Issue stations, which showed the maps. These are all the fold-out maps that you have in the Appendix A, I believe, of your report. We blew those up and put them up for the public to see. And then these were accompanied by a city staff person. We had the fire chief there to help us with the wildland fire issue station, for example. At each issue station, we also, in addition to the map, we had a summary table. The summary table in your document is sorted by study area. These summary tables were sorted by issue topic, and the list of criteria so people could understand the scores that they were seeing in the summary table. And we had comment cards at the issue station. So if someone wanted to give a comment, for example, about fire safety, they would have a comment card at that issue station that they could fill out to comment on that topic. We also had what we called study area stations. That's an example of the study area station for study area 13. They were set up on the wall just like that, or on cafeteria tables. So people could look at the 3 land use maps for each of the study areas. They could look at the summary table for the study area. And then there was a piece of butcher paper where people could provide comments. There were also comment cards, so people could write longer comments if they wanted to. And a set of about 4 to 5 study area stations. Each set was facilitated by a county staff facilitator. This is a summary of the input that we received at those study area stations. And we're going to go through this again. Each time we start to discuss a study area station later on tonight, we're going to go through this input again. This is just a quick overview for you. In study area 5, Magalia, most of the commenters supported alternative 1 or 2 and cited concerns about infrastructure, water, evacuation, and fire and sheriff services as their main reasons for supporting less development in this area. 2 comments supported some very low density rural development patterns. In Concow, we received 2 comments, but neither of the comments was actually about study area number 7. They were from a commenter who wanted this study area to be expanded to include Yankee Hill. In study area 10, along the Skyway and Neal Road, most people who commented supported alternative 1, and for the reasons that they wanted to preserve open space, prevent visual impacts, conserve blue oak woodlands, and they were concerned about developing on steep topography that's used by deers and also by water to recharge groundwater. Study area 11, the Paradise Urban Reserve. We had a range of comments here. 1 alternative 1, 1 alternative 2. The same person who pointed out the need to preserve blue oak woodlands in study area 10 also applied that comment to study area 11. Obviously, they're very close together. In study area 12, we have, again, kind of a range of comments supporting alternative 2 with a change to add more open space, coordinating specific plan development with the town of Paradise, which I believe is, there is already a Southeast Paradise specific plan for this area, and support for smart growth in this area. In study area 13, South Paradise Pence Road, people also call this the Lago Vista site in some of your comments. Most people opposed alternatives 2 and 3, and some stated support for alternative 1. Again, there were concerns about water supply, fire and sheriff services, fire response times, and impacts to wildlife in that area. I know there's a wildlife preserve in that area. We also heard from the landowner in this area who supported alternative 3 and suggested kind of a refinement or additional detail for alternative 3. The landowner indicated in his comments that there have been an extensive study done in this area, and there is a belief based on those studies that many of the issues raised in the alternatives evaluation report could be addressed through appropriate design of the project. And in study area 20, the last one we're going to be talking about, on Highway 191 at Durham-Pence down by Butte College, most people supported alternative 1. People kind of saw this as sprawl or leapfrog development. Several stated a desire to maintain the 5-acre zoning and rural type of development that's in the area now. But there was also one comment supporting additional retail in the area. The second main component of our evening, as I mentioned earlier, was a town hall discussion. I stood at an easel at the front of the room. People came up to the microphone and gave suggestions about what they would like to see their fellow Butte County citizens making decisions based on, what they would urge their fellow Butte County citizens to do to decide about the future of Butte County. The main points, this is not all of the points that we heard. You do have all of the points that we heard transcribed in your CAC packet, but some of the kind of overall themes that emerged were a desire to prevent sprawl and preserve open space, and a real sense that Butte County to date has done better at this maybe than some other areas of rural California, and we want to keep doing better at it. A need to distinguish between smart growth and no growth, and the idea there being that some growth is okay, but it needs to be smart or intelligently done. Some people did support mixed use and high density housing as an opportunity, a way to add opportunities for people to get into the housing market, but we also heard a lot of people say that I like the low density rural lifestyle. I want to be able to raise 4-H animals, and we really need to make sure there continues to be a place for that in Butte County. A lot of people spoke on the need to protect water resources. We had one speaker who spoke pretty strongly about concerns about the cultural resources analysis and outlined several reasons why human error in recording cultural resources sites may have led to inaccuracies in the cultural resource analysis or inadequacy. There is, we heard from Belmere residents who had organized themselves to very strongly support Alternative 2 and Study Area 3. At various times, different people got up and opposed development in these study areas you see listed here, 6, 14, 15, 16, 18, and 19. None of those are on our list to discuss tonight, but this is part of the town hall discussion, so we wanted to communicate it to you. Others spoke in support of a smaller amount of development in study areas 14 and 15. And the project proponent for study areas 27 and 28 got up and spoke about the sustainable and mixed use project that they would like to do and see in that area. And then we had someone raise concerns about septic issues in study area 9 that would result from the lava underlying that study area. Again, those are not on our agenda to discuss tonight, but it may inform your overall discussion. So that's it for the explanation of March 27th and your alternatives evaluation report.
Joanna, thank you very much. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that presentation we're not going to repeat next week, right? So we will come back to each individual study area. But you guys don't want to hear it again, right? No. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that was clear, that as we go through the individual study areas, we will remind you of some of the input on each of them. But as we move forward, we anticipate the meeting next week and the week after next to really be continuations of this, and we're going to have a lot more study areas to cover. So we're really going to dive in at the beginning of those meetings straight into the study areas that we need to look at. So with that said, those conclude our presentations, and Joanna has actually gotten us pretty much exactly back on schedule with the brevity of her presentation, so I appreciate that very much, and want to open it up for any questions from the committee members about material you've heard so far, anything that you feel needs to be asked before we open it up for public comment. Jeff.
Yes, first of all, I want to commend you, your firm, and particularly Joanna. The March 27 meeting I thought was very good, and perhaps being denser than most, for the first time I kind of had an inkling of the process and how we might be headed somewhat in the right direction. So I applaud you in the conduct of that meeting. A couple of questions about methodology. I'm not certain I understand the analysis for fiscal impacts, and I would ask that maybe you clarify that.
Okay, I will do my best, and Joanna or Tanya may want to add. Joanna, you might as well come up. Or, yeah, maybe Joanna and Tanya should both come up here and sit on chairs next to me, because I bet we'll have lots of questions that I can't answer. The fiscal analysis was done by our subconsultant, Bay Area Economics, working out of their Davis office. They took the projected amounts of development foreseen under each alternative and put them into a model in which they had already projected for various types of development. How does that development probably perform in its balance of tax collection or generation versus the probable costs associated with serving it? They had to make, obviously, certain assumptions. They made those assumptions based on existing county governmental operating patterns. So, for example, they looked at what they understand to be the demand for various services put forward by people living in a certain density of homes. They then calculated the average amount of service demand created in dollars for, say, a type of home, and the average tax paid, and then they multiplied those by numbers of units and got a balance. They did also consider the tax unit, tax collection unit in which every individual development would be located, because although everyone pays essentially the same dollar ad valorem value of property tax, that property tax goes to different sources in different places depending on what districts and service districts exist. So they limited that analysis to county governmental funds and did the analysis on that basis.
Was the analysis done based on build-out under each alternative? So there was an assumption that this is at full build-out.
There was, in the initial calculations, there was an assumption of full build-out, but if you read the report, you'll see that in many cases they tempered that by saying we actually believe that full build-out is very unlikely. And the final score given, A, B, C, or D, is weighted or changed by virtue of a projection of how much of the development allowed would actually occur. So if you read the text, you will see both pieces of information, both what the fiscal impact would be if it could be built out fully, as well as the fiscal impact that's actually projected based on what they consider to be the more likely build out under market conditions. Both of those pieces of information are there. The score, A, B, C, or D, is based on probable build-out and not theoretical build-out.
Good.
Am I doing okay so far? Yeah, okay. That's in that book. The individual evaluations are in the fiscal section of the evaluation for each of the 34 study areas. And Appendix B explains the methodology that I just explained.
And one final question, I don't want to monopolize this. The analysis assumed only the existence of current districts. It did not assume the establishment of new districts. For example, Mellow.
For fiscal, that is true. Now, if you look at the service sections, you will see statements that say this development could probably not be served with existing infrastructure and is not in an existing service agency, and hence a new service district would need to be formed. That, again, is outlined in the text. But the fiscal evaluation assumes simply the districts that exist today.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, John.
Actually, under the same point, the likely build-out given constraints and the likely build-out given market viability also factor into this thing about fiscal impacts. So if a study area is deemed that it would require a full urban level of services at considerable cost, but that the scenarios, anything but the current, say in this case, grazing scenario, the other two scenarios constitute a need to absorb 93% of all growth till 2030. So you get 93% of everything that's going to happen in an unincorporated county, and then the math works. So I think that there's at least on the study area 15, there's some disparity between the likely market absorption and the assumptions about where the fiscal impacts are going to land.
I would suggest that why don't we make a note of that comment about study area 15, and which we're not discussing tonight. We'll try and look into it. I appreciate the heads up, and we'll try and be ready for you when we do get to it in the next couple of weeks.
Well, I use it to illustrate an example, but this tracks in a similar way when you look at the market viability is held off of consideration of the fiscal impacts in terms of how much of the available market in Butte County's unincorporated areas you have to, how much budget for civilization you get, how much goes to a given study area. That's not taken into account before the fiscal issues are counted.
Well, I'm not sure I hear what you're saying, and I'm not sure it's a question, but I'll treat it as such. We actually did, I think, the opposite of what you're saying. We did make a projection of market viability. That is mentioned here in the report. And then in the fiscal section, it goes back and talks about it says, given the market viability we have found, this is the likely fiscal impact. Now,
Okay.
I think your point may be
My point is,
okay.
if market valuability is a D, no way in hell you're going to get this many people on this piece of ground.
Yes.
It's really hard to say the fiscal impacts are going to get you a B. Because what's the baseline of the economics? I think the order of operation in your equation is out of whack, is what I'm saying.
Okay, I think the order of operation in our equation is actually the one you wish it were, and I beg to differ. I mean, I don't have the exact page in front of you. In front of me that you're talking about, but it is conceivable that you could have a market viability of D and a fiscal impact of B, because even the thing that would be built under market conditions might have a fiscal impact of B. It might have even though you can't build the thing proposed, you can't fully build it out. The thing that we project that you would build out if you allowed this larger thing to be built might actually have a relatively good fiscal impact.
If my aunt had a mustache, she'd be my uncle. I mean, it doesn't track that way. If there is not enough market delivered to the site, it will not get to the point to support an aggressive level of urban services, which is identified as what you need.
But remember, and this may be the disconnect, the fiscal assumptions are only about the county's general fund. So if we assume the necessary creation of a new sewer district, that is, its financial viability may be very difficult. That is mentioned in the services section, but that service district, for better or worse, would be outside the county's coffers.
Well, yeah, these are the service districts that then become the responsibility of the county after they fail.
That would be what happened, and that is covered in
That's like saying my family's finances are fine, but if my kids drive me to bankruptcy, well, that doesn't really count.
Okay. So, John, I think your points are well taken, and I would encourage you to come back to these points during the principles section, because I think you are driving towards certain principles that I think the committee will very much want to hear at that point. Helene.
Actually, this was in the same direction. You'll see in the letters they gave us, actually North Star Engineering did do their own. After you did theirs, it says that they did a more in-depth study and want to change their grades. Is it possible for someone to take hold of an area and decide to change their grade and add more to it? And who does answer or respond to the amendments that we're seeing in this packet?
Well, we're not going to be sending transcripts to any four-year colleges, so there's no need to change grades after the fact. Okay. The scoring that exists is the best scoring that our staff could come up with in consultation with county staff. It is very much appropriate that an individual property owner, their engineer, or anyone else could suggest alternative scoring. You have those letters before you. I think the letter you're referring to is probably suggesting finding more market viability or better fiscal impact. John is suggesting that maybe we found too much market viability or too good a fiscal impact. I'm sure we will find people on all sides who feel various things about whether we've been too conservative or too liberal. We're going to stand by what we've done. I encourage you to listen to each other and read the letters you've gotten, take those things into account as well, make your own conclusions.
So who responds to these letters? Do these people get responded to, or are they all going to kind of keep coming at us with the same thing?
I think they're going to keep coming at us, and one of the things I think we all have to accept is that there is no definitive...
We're not going to please everyone.
We're not going to please everyone, and we're never even going to have a definitive factual answer to everything. We have given you our best input, our best professional opinion. You're getting other professional opinions from North Star Engineering and others.
Okay.
It is your job to weigh all of that input and make your decision about what you think the best policy decision is based on all of that input you have.
And when we get input, though, if we make a suggestion, as John is, to change a grade or change something in an area, is that something that we take to the floor with you, or when we're in these study areas, or Is that something?
I would encourage you not to spend your time this evening or over the next 2
Doing that.
weeks changing the grades
Yeah.
in this report. What we really need you to do is make decisions about what development should occur or not occur in each area. You can certainly make that either based on input we've given you or based on your own input because you don't believe the input we've given you. That's all fine. And I think you should say, John should say, you should say, I've read the letter from North Star Engineering. I agree with them more than I agree with DC&E. Therefore, I want to do X. Or you can say, I've read DC&E's report. I think it's full of Twinkies. I think the real answer is this other thing, and therefore I support the following. I don't think, though, that we want to republish this report with new grades. I think that would be a lot of wasted time. But it would be very good for you all to discuss them as we get to the individual areas and base your decisions not only on what we've written, but on your own perceptions of what's true.
Thank you.
But so when it comes down to a pass-fail, we're allowed to consider what? In addition to this, extra credit and the student's behavior?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Extra credit, the student's behavior, or your own review of the student's work as well. So in other words, if we gave it a B but you thought it was a D, you can certainly base your decision on that, as well as not just our B but your own D.
And then they have the path to appeal to the supervisors?
They do, exactly.
Okay. I think I know the rules.
Yes, Bill.
Would you clarify, were your evaluations based on the constraints of current policy and current general plan? As an example, wastewater is an issue in many of the rural communities, but the trade-off was between a traditional septic and a sewer system. Both the technology today and in the coming years is going to change that substantially, as well as the settings and trends report suggested that they're currently undergoing a lot of change in the policy towards those things. So the question is, can I make a broad brush generalization? And so it sounds like that's what you've done, is at least that particular evaluation was made in light of what is used right daily today is a traditional septic, and the other is a sewer system. But can I say that that's applied for all of these areas in general?
I'm going to be much more comfortable answering that question, particularly about wastewater, than generally. But I'll give a general answer, which is that generally speaking, we are assuming that the land use alternatives are what they are, and to some extent they do conflict with current county policy, and what they're about is we would ultimately change county policy in order to allow the land use alternative that you ultimately ask us to create a general plan for. That's a general answer that may be somewhat dissatisfying. I think more specifically on the wastewater question, I can say that as a general rule, what we assumed is that, yes, technologies are changing. The county is in the process of looking at what's appropriate in its own policies. Given all that, we made a series of assumptions that said that larger lots, generally speaking, if they're at low enough densities, can be served by septic. We set the limit at about 1 acre lots, 1 unit per acre. If we got above that level, we assumed that it needed some sort of sewer system of a centralized nature. Where the development was larger, we assumed that it would probably be able to pay for such a sewer system. If it was a small number of units in an area without a sewer system but at a density above 1 unit per acre, we assumed that that would be difficult to serve because it was too dense to do septic and not large enough to build its own sewer system. So that's the basic set of criteria we used, and again, those are documented in Appendix B on methodology. Am I doing okay again? Yeah? Okay. Yes.
Following up, I think Bill was kind of hitting some of the questions I had. Would you then, following up on that, you would be comfortable in saying that all of these study areas were kind of really, all your grades, et cetera, and analysis, the methodology was a traditional one as opposed to a smart growth, new technologies, new growth area that you used? Let's say you had 100 acres with 100 units. You made the assumption there would be 1 acre each with a septic, and it went by that, not a cluster, say, where there's 100 units all together and the rest is all open space. So all of these were based on a traditional model, kind of not some of the recharge things that we've seen during your presentations, new septics, all these other type of things.
I guess the one place I would beg to differ would be in your overall statement that these are only traditional and not smart growth. But it is what we said it is. That is that if we said it's 100 units on 100 acres, we meant that those are built essentially at 1 unit per acre. If we meant it's 100 units on 10 acres with 90 acres in open space, we said that. Okay. And there are some alternatives that do that, that say we've got a 100-acre site or a 1,000-acre site, and we're going to develop 10% of it at a relatively higher density, and we're going to leave the rest in open space. So we do have, in my opinion, some smart growth alternatives that you're looking at.
But only if they were pre-written into the alternative.
But only if they were written in that way.
Okay.
If it says it's 100 units on 100 acres, we do presume in that case that they're spread over the entire 100 acres. Yes, Jeff?
Is the assumption that proximity to a water provider equates to availability of water?
Boy, when we get into water, then we've spent a lot of time on water and trying, because I should say in general, there's a lot of concern about water, there's a lot of information about water that's about 80% complete, and there's almost no water information available that's 100% complete. So we were really we had a hard time figuring out how to evaluate water. In the end, we did assume that, again, is this right, that if you are close to an existing water provider, that it will be easier to get water than if you're not close to an existing water provider. I have heard a lot of comment, both before and after we wrote this report, that just because you're in a water service area with a water provider doesn't necessarily mean that, but the more we researched it, the more we found that we really didn't have a further basis for making conclusions. I know there's a lot of information out there that, as I say, is probably 80% done. People think that we can perhaps draw conclusions from it, but the more we spoke to the county's Water Resources Department, the more we realized that we really are not in a position to make more definitive statements than that.
Thank you.
And that is mentioned again in the criteria. Joanna's looking at page B17 at the back of the report. Yes, Alan.
Let's see, the question I have is on under public services, capacity of school districts. And what was the procedure there, or the evaluation procedure there? How did that work?
Well, we did actually contact every school district in question. We talked about the capacities within their schools that would be affected by development in the area. We talked with them about their ability to build new schools within their districts. The criteria that we used are listed on page B-15, and maybe I should just read them. So development got an A if all the students generated from the study area would be accommodated by existing capacity at existing schools in the district. It was a B if they could be accommodated at planned capacity. Districts had already planned schools or classrooms, although not necessarily built them. There was a C if there was not enough planned capacity for new students, but the study area would generate enough students to build a new school. We assumed that through fees and other things that they could build the school, and that got a C. And then a D was assigned if there was both not enough capacity to serve the students, but also not enough students to justify building new schools to serve them. That got a D.
Okay, was there an E which said that the new students in a new area could go to an existing school?
If an existing school has enough capacity to serve new students, that would have gotten an A.
Okay, okay. Then I'll reserve my next question until we get to the discussion then.
Okay. Any other questions? We're at about the time that we should move on. Any final questions? Okay. Well, in that case, what I want to do now is turn it over for public comment. We're going to take about half an hour for public comment, and I want to make sure anyone who wants to speak will get a chance to do so. So can I I see a show of hands of the number of members of the public that want to speak. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I'm going to bet that a couple others will think to speak by the end. But I think if we limit you to 2 minutes each, 15 times 2 is the 30 minutes we have, and so let's try and do that. So if you could think about your comments in a way that you can limit them to 2 minutes. Those of you who need to rewrite your prepared comments to get down to 2 minutes could speak towards the end. And let me invite those of you who are ready to speak now to come to the microphone. We will be taking written notes of your comments, and we are also taping the comments, so there will be a record. Mark, go ahead, and I will be doing a timing, and I don't have a clock or anything, but just watch me.
It's 1 minute and 47 seconds.
Okay, great.
My name is Mark Stenbeck. I've been a resident of Butte County since 1982. I'm pastor of Our Savior Lutheran Church and a charter member of Tuscan Ridge, where I've also served on the Men's Club board since it was first formed. I would speak in support of any land-use alternative that would allow the housing project at Tuscan Ridge. It's a necessary step if this course is to remain open in the years to come. As a board member, I'm aware that the course continues to lose money, and the only long-range way for it to be financially viable is to have housing at the course. I'm obviously interested in the course remaining open because I love my own golf course and I want to be able to continue to play there, but I'm also concerned if the course were to close, an important recreation facility would not be available in Butte County. As Men's Club, we operate 2 weekly leagues and host monthly tournaments. These events are open not only to our own men's club, but to all the golfers in Butte County, and other times groups like SIRS come from even out of the area. There are many tournaments that support charity, raising charity funds for Butte County. As a member of the Men's Club, we support junior golf, and Tuscan Ridge allows local high school teams to practice at our facility and host their tournaments there. We recently provided a scholarship for a Butte College golfer. The loss of Tuscan Ridge would be a loss of tax revenue and an important recreation opportunity for our county. I'm very proud to be a grandfather. When I drive to Chico, my little grandsons are with me, and we pass Tuscan Ridge, and one of them usually says, "Papa, that's your golf course." I'm glad that under the plans that are being proposed on Tuscan Ridge, that would continue to be the case. The housing proposed would be off in the middle of the course, so those driving by would still have 2 miles of greenbelt. I hope that you will approve a land use plan that would support the proposed housing at Tuscan Ridge so that the course and the Men's Club can continue to operate and serve the county, and so that perhaps in 2030, one of my great-grandsons will say, "Papa, that's you golf course." Thank you.
Thank you, and that was pretty much exactly 2 minutes. That would be relevant to study area 10, and particularly, I believe, support for alternative 3 in study area 10. Bruce?
I just had a question from him. Is he in favor of alternative 3?
I interpreted it that
well,
way.
I did too. But.
Do you want to confirm that? Is that right? Yes. Okay. That would be alternative 3 in study area 10. Sir.
Thank you. My name is Mike McLaughlin. I'm a resident of Paradise. I would like to touch just very briefly on all of the alternatives with the exception of all the study areas, that is, with the exception of study areas 10 and 14. By the way, I note that 14 is not one under consideration here, but let me go forward. I have been a resident here for 35 years, and frankly, I like Paradise just the way it was 30 years ago. But that is not a realistic expectation. Wasn't one then, nor is it one now, especially as the state is anticipating a 50% growth in the county in the next decade and a half. I think we have to finally kind of bite the bullet here and make some very important decisions that are reflected in the 3 alternatives. Whether we fight to keep it the same as it was, as in alternative 1, or go for high density in alternative 2, or for alternative 3, allow for rural spread, which actually means spread in big proportions. I would like us to consider that if we have to narrow this down to these 3 alternatives, that we take a serious look at alternative 2. I think it's very important for
30 seconds.
People on the ridge to have open space, and we must capitalize on that. And with the reality of the dramatic growth coming in the next decade and a half, probably the high density is going to have to be our choice. And I know in many ways that's sort of a bitter pill. As I say, I think this is going to be a very difficult issue to contend with. Let me now turn to the 2 study areas.
That's the end of your time. I'm sorry.
Pardon me?
That's the end of your 2 minutes.
I'm sorry. Okay.
What I can do, if we have any time at the end, I could recognize speakers who want to come back, but there are 15 people who...
No, I understand. Thank you, if you would do that.
Thank you. Okay. Next.
Thank you. My name is Martin Nichols, and I'm a resident of the town of Paradise. It's been raised by some of your commission members. I think you need to do a lot more work on your economic analysis and fiscal analysis of this. You need to understand the fundamentals of growth in California. If you had a $100 million new project in Butte County, The property taxes would be 1% or $1 million a year, of which the county gets between 7 and 20% based on your report. 20%, the high number, $200,000, might pay for 2 cops, might come close to paying for 2 cops. It certainly won't pay for maintaining the roads. It certainly won't pay for any fire services. The only kind of growth that really has any sort of significant economic positive benefit is commercial and retail. You're not going to get that without having major water treatment facilities necessary to accommodate that growth. Your principles here aren't in a way principles, they're statements of fact. There should be a principle, at least in the area of public services, you don't make things worse by whatever growth alternative you make. Growth is inevitable, it's going to happen. Maybe the best you can do as a committee and a plan is to slow down the negative impacts that it's going to have on all the existing residents, but that ought to be one of your principles, and you ought to look to the ways to maintain growth and help growth pay for itself. The only way to do that is through various special taxing districts that need to be incorporated in the, into the general plan approvals of each, or the conditions of approval of each of the projects as they come forward. I don't think that's addressed here, and I think that's a real weakness in your process so far. Thank you.
Thank you.
How's it going? Dylan Paul. I just have a few comments more about the overall process here, not specifically on any one study area, but I've heard a lot of what people don't want over the past meetings. And I think the few real positives I got were at the Chico State meetings where the students were actually talking about what they want. And this is something where we're trying to build a framework around this vision. I really think that it would be outstanding to hear more of what people do want to see. A few people have already spoken to this, but the illusion of having no growth isn't really a reality. In fact, if you stopped all growth, we'd probably put out the any economic forward movement that's actually happening. So looking at areas that have been identified over and over again in land use planning arenas and saying growth is going to happen out here. Even if it's open space ag, it doesn't mean that they're not going to put up a processing plant, that they're not going to have a warehouse storage. There are uses under open space ag. So to allow nothing, you're only allowing for maybe the worst of what you might want to see out there, rather than saying, let's bring the developers to the table, let's talk with the educational institutions, let's bring the government all in one room and actually create what we do want Butte County to look like in 2030, because I think that's really why we're all here, is we all have a vested interest in what the county is going to look like 20 years from now. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Jack Danielson, and I've been a teacher here for the last 20 years at Paradise High School. Currently, I coach girls golf and boys golf, and I'm speaking in favor of Alternative 3 in Study Area 10. I've had the pleasure of coaching golf at Tuscan Ridge for the last 3 years. I watched it grow from a club that wasn't very busy to a club that's extremely busy, and it supplies a really heavy demand for recreation in our community, especially for our high school teams. Not only do our Paradise teams practice there, but Las Plumas and Oroville teams come to practice there because they can't get on facilities in Oroville. Chico and Pleasant Valley teams also practice there because they can't get on facilities in Chico. And Tuscan Ridge also supports Butte College and Chico State Golf. It has become a really important facility for us. I personally host at least 5 high school tournaments there every year, and I host 4 fundraising tournaments every year that benefit this high school right here significantly. And so I really would hope that we could make that work for Tuscan Ridge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Greetings, I'm Jim Stevens, and I'm with North Star Engineering, and also speaking about Area 10 in support of Alternative 3. The 2 previous gentlemen have spoke eloquently on the social and recreational aspects of the proposal. I just kind of like to speak to a little bit to the technical ones. And one of the unfortunate things about the analysis of Area 10 is that the proposal, including around the golf course, is kind of tossed in with an array of other alternatives, including industrial development. We took a look at the site itself of Area 10, we concluded that the majority of the open space potential for development, the great majority, is rather either developed or surrounded by slopes in excess of 30%, thus rendering them impossible to access and unlikely to develop, and particularly in an industrial fashion, with the sole exception being the strip along the Skyway where the existing golf course is. I'd just like to real briefly take a quick analysis of some of the grading that we felt was kind of unduly burdened upon the alternative 3 proposal due to its inclusion with the industrial desires. And for one, the market viability and fiscal impact got relatively low grades due to the fact that it was very unlikely that industrial would ever develop or be acceptable. And that's kind of a no-brainer just due to the proximity and the topography. So we think that in analyzing the project from it's kind of a hybrid basis only for the residential component and only out on the Skyway, we think it makes a heck of a lot of sense. It provides an opportunity
15 seconds.
Thank you. Provides lots of opportunity for development basically in an already developed state. So it takes away biological concerns, it takes away recharge concerns, it takes away runoff concerns, and in the middle of a development of a golf course, it certainly eliminates fire concerns. It's going to be a private system.
Time.
Thank you.
Okay. Before you step down, I do want to just make sure I've understood what you said and say to the committee something I'm not sure we have said. I think your comments essentially are that you would like to see alternative 3 for study area 10, or perhaps even a modification of alternative 3 that would have the residential component without the industrial component. And I want to make sure you, audience members, and all the committee members understand that you certainly can do that with any of these study areas and any alternative. You don't have to choose just alternative 1, 2, or 3. You can modify any of those alternatives to make a change to it. And I wanted to make sure we said that clearly and make sure that we interpret your comments correctly.
David, I appreciate you mentioning that. And in fact, after the last meeting, we provided some written comments, and unfortunately, they didn't get into the packets tonight, and I apologize for not ensuring that that was done. But we will certainly re-provide them to the staff and ask that they submit them back out to the committee so that you'll have a benefit of those.
But so that modification is something that could be considered. Next comment.
My name is Alicia Whittlesey, and I've been unable to come to other meetings, but I'm glad to be here tonight, and I've been impressed so far tonight at the kinds of issues that you all are considering and the complexity of the decisions that you're going to have to make. And I've been impressed through reading the town hall comment sheet that a lot of my fellow citizens have expressed concern about sustainability and open space. And I've lived in Butte County since I was 3 months old, and for the past 4 years I've been away at college, and it's always been really wonderful to come home to Butte County, and in large part this is because of the open space and wild character of the county. I went to school in Southern California, and so as I drove up I-5, I always felt closer and closer to home, and the skies would get darker and darker, the air quality would get better and better, and I hope that I will always be able to come home to a place that is really beautiful like Butte County is today. And I also want to say that, yes, the population in California is growing and we have to address growth in some way, but we don't need to take for granted sprawl or certain kinds of growth. There are ways of growing inside urban areas that can provide a very high quality of life, and I think that Portland provides a very interesting example of having concentrated development and really dedicated open space and public use of open space areas. And I think that ideally Butte County could offer more high-density housing, which is also...
About 15 seconds.
Okay, lower-cost housing, and provide open space, which is a very equitable way of having people enjoy our beautiful county. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Denise Britton. I'm a citizen of Paradise. I actually came here in 1974 and left to go to college afterwards, and came back about 5 years ago. And the reason I came back is because of the scenic quality and the recreational opportunities that are offered as a result of the natural resources in Butte County, and I'd very much like to see those natural resources emphasized and preserved to the greatest extent possible in this general plan. One of the things that doesn't appear to be addressed is the fact that it is actually a state law that there should be a oak preservation ordinance within the county. That has not happened, and it's not really being addressed, and I would like to see it addressed in this area. I'd also really like to see major emphasis in the, for wildlife corridors. Butte County's got one of the biggest deer herds in the state, and it's a significant area for that, and we really need to emphasize it. And I don't know all of the study areas. I haven't actually been to any of the meetings prior to this one, but I do know that driving back and forth between Paradise and Chico, that the scenic corridor of the Skyway is extremely important, not only to me but to other people who make that drive as well, and that perhaps some development along there would be appropriate, but that keeping that scenic quality is extremely, I think it's important to the town of Paradise, especially, and also to the citizens that work back and forth. So I hope that there is real emphasis on the scenic qualities of that corridor. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
My name's Scott Perkins. My companies are the PLM Group and Oral Lake Constructors. I was born and raised in Orville, but I have both development interest and agriculture interest in various parts of the county. My comments are going to be real general and brief. As you see, I have some comments that I put before you this evening for your review, one of which is regarding a couple specific study areas in Orville, which I'm sure we'll be addressing next week. The other brief that I gave you is regarding some of the presentations that we've had. The turnout's great tonight. At some of those presentations, the turnout wasn't so great, and so some of you did not get a flavor for how those presentations moved forward, what the context of them were. All of that which is put into the general plan or put into these guiding principles and the settings and trends. And there's a lot of buzzwords in there that should be really recognized. Sustainability, smart growth, sprawl, which are, in my mind, and I'm in the industry, are really buzzwords that have a negative connotation to them. So I guess the main point that I would like to make in closing is common sense. And all the questions that I've heard from the committee tonight up until the point of public comment were just that. Everybody just going, hey, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Economics, sustainability, fiscal analysis. I agree with David. There's a few Twinkies in the report that he mentioned, but I think they're fixable. So use common sense. Let's come up with a good alternative for each of the given areas. Thank you.
Is the North County's next week and South County's the following week? Is that right?
South County is next week, and then the Chico North County area is the final week. Please.
Hi, April Grossberger, Paradise resident. I come from a family of golfers. I have a set for sale if anyone's interested, a signed historic set, a classic set. But I wanted to talk something that I think Jim Stevens left out about Alternative 3 in Area 10. That's the traffic analysis. As you drive up and down the Skyway, imagine the impact to traffic as you're coming up and going down right there. It's already a high accident zone. Just ask yourself how that will be handled. I'm not opposed to that being developed. My greatest concern is the traffic that intersection will have to receive if we have homes in that area. A stoplight there, I don't know if that's really a realistic option, and that's sort of one of the alternatives that I heard would have to be looked at if a development subdivision were to go in at that area. So I'm not convinced with the information that I've seen at this point that Area 10 Alternative 3 is the best. At the same time, I'm not convinced that maybe having houses there isn't possible, but the Skyway cannot take that impact, that traffic impact at that point. In 2000, the University of California did a Skyway land use study and scenic standards for the Skyway. I'm going to pass this around if you guys want to flip through it. It is available online, but here is a real hard copy. If I could get it back at the end of the night, that would be great. But as you have a break or you have a few minutes, take a look at this. This is something that people have been asking for for the Skyway for at least the last 8 years. It's not new information. So maybe as you're making your decisions on what to do and what these alternatives look like what was said earlier, the 3 alternatives aren't the only alternatives. And maybe with all the great minds that we have in this room, we could even come up with a 4th alternative that incorporates the best practices possible. Thank you.
April, can you give us the web link for that?
I thought that was posted on the general plan update. Yeah,
Yes, so if
it's actually
if you
on
go
the
to
general.
the general plan website, you'll find a link.
You'll
to it.
find a link to it. So.
Scott, please.
My name's Scott Wyckoff. I represent the landowner for Study Area 13, and I want to thank the members of the committee for the time to be able to say a few things quickly. I think our study area is unique from the others in a couple of ways. One is that in general, the existing land use in the majority of the study areas is either agriculture or open space in the current general plan, and there's a desire to either add housing or industrial or an additional use to the study areas. Our study area currently has a designation of residential land use and zoning in the current general plan for the Butte County. And this is a study area where we've been working. There was a general plan, there was a tentative subdivision map that was approved already on this study area back in the late 70s, early 80s. The first phase of that was built, and that's the Lago Vista subdivision, which has connecting streets and roads that connect to the study area. And since 2005, we've been doing additional studies on the area at the direction of the county. We've been doing wet season groundwater monitoring to determine the suitability of wastewater and some of these other things, biological studies. And my request tonight to the members of the committee is Alternative 1 changes our land, which has been zoned residential for a number of years, 20 years, changes it to an open space only designation. Alternative 2 gives an open space and a residential, but it clumps all the residential development next to the existing landowners. And we've had several meetings with the existing property owners, and they don't necessarily want the density of population right next to them.
You have about half a minute.
In that area, okay. But Study Area 3 allows us to dictate, let our design dictate and avoid constraints like migration corridors for the deer, wetland features, so we can use open space and use some flex lot design and clustering to develop a project that kind of meets the needs of the existing residents and some others. So I would, my recommendation is to go with the Alternative 3, and we provided some additional information into the agenda packet which you have. That would just give us the opportunity to develop a project to submit to approve. And I also remind you, we're not approving projects here either, it's just the land uses. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
David?
Yes, please. Bruce.
One question for Scott. Yes, sir. How are you going to deal with the sewer?
What we've been doing is the wet season groundwater monitor for the last 3 winters. We have test holes out there where when the rain falls, we see how fast it percolates and absorbs and how the water reacts. And so we're going to do an on-site system, a community system for the residences that would be built there.
Thank you. Yeah, and in response to Scott's comment, I wanted to go back to something Todd asked and just clarify. He asked if there's 100 units on 100 acres, do we assume it's 101 acre lots? And I said generally yes. I'm going to stick to that answer, but I want to temper it by saying something that Scott brought up. We did also assume, and this is documented where we assumed in the text, that those 100 units on those 100 acres could be allocated across the site in a way that you might still leave, for instance, deer migration corridors or preserve certain wetlands. If we thought that that was possible to cluster the development on various parts across that theoretical 100 acres, we have mentioned that and documented it. So again, it is still an assumption. If we say 100 units on 100 acres, we assume it's most of that area, but we do also assume that it is designed in a way that individual houses would avoid the most sensitive resources.
So when you're you're employing a little bit of subjectivity and assumptions in that, and we have which is fine because it can't all just be calculated. But my questions are: will that be apparent when we look at each study area? Will it be somewhat apparent what are assumptions and what are calculated?
I think we can. Yes, it is clear in the text, and Tanya is going to give those presentations. Tanya, as you do those, can you mention that briefly? Yes, she's nodding her head yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Next speaker, John.
Okay, my name is John Warisek, and I am from Area 13.
and I would like to make comments to a few of the items here on the plan. The first one was that if you will look in the notes from the other people, you will find out that everybody is concerned about water. Not only water quality, but water supply. We got right now problem, and we have only a few houses over there, but still, here is water supply grade A. So I will question how the committee came to that grade A. My other question will be to the fire protection. You know, a few years ago, I was standing on the roof of my house, watering it down because the fire was on the other end of the canyon. And if the fire will jump over the river, nothing probably will help us. The developer is saying that they will build up a lot of fire hydrants, but you know, from the Oakland and from the down south, it didn't help that 1,000 housing over there burn around. And my comment about the deer herd is that, yes, the deer is coming over there, but it's going exactly through the wooded area where the developer wants to build the housing, okay? It will not go to the open meadow, which is behind my house. And my last comment probably will be this. When I moved to Butte County 17 years ago, I was told that if there will be housing built behind my house, that every house will be on 1 acre lot.
You have about 30 seconds.
Okay, how you can see, the developer which when talked to us on the meeting was saying that they will build maximum 320 houses on 150 acres. Right now on the paper they are still talking about 420 houses on 150 acres. So I would like the committee to keep the word which we were given by your predecessors. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just want to get a show of how many more people there are to speak. We are at time now, so how many more? There's 2 standing. I see 1, 2 hands. Okay, so those will be the last 4. Sir, who I had to cut off, I'm afraid we're not going to have time for a second round of speakers since we'll be a little over time, but we'll take the last 4 for 2 minutes each. Nola?
Hi, my name is Nola Force, and I've been acting for the last 2 years as a community planner, working as a consultant after 30 years experience out of this area in land use planning. I'd like to address CAC on 2 particular study areas. The first one is number 20, and that is the 191 Durham-Pence Road. And I'd like to encourage a look at alternatives 2 and 3, a mixed use of residential and some retail. The second one I'd like to address is number 7, mainly because I don't see a lot of representation on the CAC for the Concal Yankee Hill area. And I'm a resident of the Yankee Hill area, and I've been talking to landowners in that area over the last few weeks. And I'd like to promote a new alternative with some of the input of alternative 2 and 3 there. There are a lot more Native American sites in that area, particularly Yankee Hill. Yankee Hill had a major Native American site up until 1850s, and Concal, of course, had the largest one. So I'd like to bring that to your attention and perhaps get some additional input on that.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, I'm Stephen Sayre, live in Paradise. Most of you probably have noticed that the alternatives are different for each study area, which makes it really hard to compare study areas. Are those only alternatives that we could consider?
No, as I said before, the committee will be free to make hybrids out of the alternatives or create a 4th alternative to suggest.
Committee members, I appreciate the opportunity to speak. My name is Jamie Holloman. I'm a 15-year resident of Paradise. I have a concern, which I notice in many planning processes, that it starts and then suddenly gets very detailed. And I'm concerned about what effect the general plan will have on future zoning and other decisions by the individual towns after the general plan is done. So I would like to suggest more concern on Butte County-wide concerns like preservation of forest canopy. You are addressing water concerns. I'm just a little worried from the way it looks that so much of your attention will focus on these already designated areas. The second concern I have is that I think that as opposed to 10 and 14, that it would be far wiser to have a study area for the whole of the Skyway. The questions that have been raised about traffic and other kinds of development and development outside of the areas that have specifically been designated closer to the road are of great concern to those of us who go there. And I just wanted to make sure that you'd heard that concern. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I know we have one more speaker, but I wanted to clarify a couple things for you, sir, just to make sure you know. I know the committee is aware the general plan that we're doing does ultimately affect the zoning, and in fact the work that we will be doing will include a rewrite of the zoning code as well. So we will be getting to that level of specificity. At the same time, I want to make sure you are aware, and I know the committee is aware, that we have jurisdiction only over the areas of the county that are not inside an incorporated city or town. We are not looking at land use policy for Paradise, Chico, Oroville, Biggs, or Gridley. Those are under the purview of the individual cities or the town of Paradise. We're only looking at the unincorporated areas.
I would only comment to that many people inside these individual towns refer to the plan very often. So if you set a tone in the rest of the area, it can have long-term effects on the individual decisions.
I'm sure county staff hopes very much that the individual cities will look at the county's general plan. I'm not sure the extent to which that is true, but it's a wonderful hope. Since I have the floor, I realized I forgot to respond to one other speaker, John, who spoke a little while ago. I know you said, I believe if I understood you, you asked the committee, how did you score this an A? I want to be clear that we did that scoring. These are not the committee's scores. You can't hold them responsible for it. If you don't like it, you can talk to me or Joanna or Tanya or Lisa. But we did the work. Don't blame the committee for those report results. Okay, last speaker would be Dawn.
Hello, thanks for hearing me tonight. I'm a resident of Paradise, fairly new here, about 2.5 years, and I'm also a wildlife biologist. So it was very much to my dismay that I found that much of Paradise and actually just the delineation of the foothill pines are out of the HCP. So my concerns are very much for protecting wildlife and wildlife corridors. And I think that we need to be very comprehensive about our development to protect those corridors and first identify them, not just in individual study areas, but as a comprehensive plan across the county, and also looking at the different jurisdictions to incorporate those. So alternative 3 to me is just not very wildlife friendly. It may protect certain sensitive areas, but we need to make sure those areas are connected to other corridors, and also that includes corridors including riparian, wetlands, meadows that deer do use, forested habitats. We just really, I want to make sure that that's looked at when we look at development. Alternative 3 also comes with sprawl, which I don't think is a good thing, which encourages fragmentation. And all kinds of development that we do have will impact wildlife, just in the fact that we have pets and cats that roam free and are hunters of birds and other wildlife. So please consider the lesser developed alternatives. I think alternative 2 could have some potential combined with alternative 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm looking at all of the study areas, really, but I'm particularly speaking to the Paradise, Magalia area, but really along the Skyway as well. So everything that's connected. Thanks.
Thank you. That was our last speaker. I do want to remind all of you that as committee members, when you're speaking, to please do speak into the microphones because we want to be sure and get you on tape. Okay, that concludes the public comment, and we're now going to move to a general discussion. We tried to insert this period of time into the schedule in order to let those of you who have said that you really wanted to have a general discussion to have some time to talk among yourselves as committee members about principles or concepts by which you believe that preferred alternatives for the individual areas should be developed. We do, of course, have a set of guiding principles for the general plan. Those have been mentioned a couple of times already this evening. We've looked at those extensively. Those are, I think, a necessary basis for all the planning we're going to do, but at the same time, those are relatively general as principles, and I think one can make an argument that almost any of the alternatives for most of the study areas could in some way fit within at least most of those principles. At the same time, I know many of you have very strong ideas about additional principles, additional goals that you have in terms of the way that the county should be preserved, conserved, and developed, the places growth should be targeted, the places that should not be developed. And it seemed important to me to have a time before we get into individual study areas for you all to discuss that. So at this point, I'd like to open the floor for any of you who want to make statements about that. To the extent we can have a back and forth discussion. I don't want to get into one or two person dialogues, but I do want to have an opportunity for discussion to try and daylight some of those issues you might have. Dan Breeden has a comment before we do that.
Could you cover the forum summary?
I did not. I guess you want me to do that. Okay. Dan has called to my attention that we do, of course, have a website forum that is available to members of the public to enter comments on. And Dan has printed out those few comments that directly address the study areas that we're looking at this evening. Let me just quickly summarize those. There have been a number of comments regarding the Golden Feather area, which is the area near Concow and Yankee Hill, Jarbo Gap. A number of comments posted by Laurel Paulson Pierce requesting that this area be studied further, that it perhaps become a new study area, and that it would be good particularly to consider infrastructure needs and park needs in there. We have some comments regarding the Skyway corridor and that it should be considered closely, and this comment particularly suggests that perhaps noticing for this meeting has not been adequate. The comment doesn't really suggest a particular approach to the Skyway area, although it mentions it is important. And then finally, we have a comment regarding from people living in the Nimshu Road area concerned about Ponderosa Road, which connects Magalia to the lower Nimshu area, and with a desire that that road be reopened. It apparently, as I understand this comment, runs across private property and is therefore closed to public access, and this commenter would like to see that road reopened in order to be sure that that there can be emergency access to the lower Nimshu Road area. So those are the three sorts of comments that have been posted to the forum regarding these 7 study areas that we'll be looking at tonight. So with that said, let me open it up and see if some of you would like to talk about general principles and approaches that you see in developing the alternatives. I see Mr. Carter has moved the microphone to his mouth, but Helene is going to go first. But you have to have the microphone too.
Thank you. I've noticed North Star speaking several times throughout this entire process. We've had a lot of professionals, a lot of experts. I really feel that the engineering information that these gentlemen have been gathering, and as we go along, you see more and more of them showing up. Is it buildable or isn't it? You know, we could sit here all day saying, I want this to happen, but did anyone really decide, like when he was mentioning, Jim, there, the 30% slope, and you just can't go there? You know, if we can't go there, then why discuss it and why waste time on it? So is it possible to get some more engineering information on the areas so that we all just don't sit here going, it could be open space because it has to be open space. There's just no way that there's going to be building on it.
Well, we have done analysis of all of the study areas and all of the alternatives. We do have engineers on our team, and we do feel that all of the alternatives have some viability. You're going to get differences of opinion from different engineers, different land planners, different experts. You've heard some of those differences this evening. I would submit to you, and I sincerely hope and believe that you have a lot of information. There are sometimes conflicting pieces of information among experts, but I think that you will find that you have enough information to make some decisions. You do have letters from North Star and other engineers. Generally, those local engineers are being paid by applicants. They might have one point of view, we might have another. Some people would say we should listen to the applicants and developers. Others would say we really want outside parties to look at this. I want to encourage you to look at all that information and to make your own decisions. But I do think, I mean, I want to say very clearly, we have looked at the viability of all of the alternatives and we have assessed those for you. We do believe that all of them can, under certain circumstances, with the needed engineering, needed grading, they can be built, and it's really up to you to decide whether you want those as part of your plan or not.
From now to 2030, and once we do make all these decisions and it's written, nothing's written in stone, who do people go to make changes? Can changes be made in areas? I mean, or is it going to be a really difficult process down the road if someone said, I wanted open space, and they realize in 2020 that that wasn't a good idea, and I want to change that? Who does that? And is this process going to be so difficult and lengthy that people it could possibly hurt us more than help us?
That's a great question. And if I could ask members of the public, if you could, to hold your conversations outside, if you need to do that. It's really hard for me to facilitate, and I think hard for the CAC members to hear if we have several other conversations going on in the room. The outside is beautiful this evening, so I encourage you to go out.
You're kicking us out?
Excuse me?
You're kicking us out, just like that.
Just like that. Only if you want to talk out at all, though. And John, if you want to talk, you've got a microphone, so I'm not going to kick you out. But Helene, back to your question. There is such a thing as a general plan amendment. This process we're in is technically a general plan amendment, since there's a general plan that exists today, although we're doing a wholesale rewrite. The county is allowed to amend its general plan up to 4 times per year under state law. Many jurisdictions do those 4 general plan amendments to have multiple little pieces inside them. So you can make really as many changes as you want, as long as you plan appropriately. And any landowner is welcome at any time to petition the county to amend the general plan regarding their property. It's certainly my hope. I'm putting a lot of my life into writing this general plan. It's my hope that people are going to take your work seriously and that it will be the policy framework that's used by the county over the next at least 10 years before the plan is fully revised again, and that it will serve as a general framework for development decisions. That said, if we find, or you find, ultimately the Board of Supervisors might find that there were small areas that where conditions have changed and they should be redesignated, that can be done through a general plan amendment, really at any time, as long as there are no more than 4 amendments per year.
Thank you.
John.
Well, since I do have a microphone, actually, to your point, or to your question, when the presentation was made to the Board of Supervisors, there were a number of parcels that were, large parcels that were study areas that were excluded from the general plan study. And what we heard from the supervisors was, well, that's way out there and it's a tough site to deal with. And if the property owner wants to study it and do all the legwork on it and bring a proposal forward, I guess we could look at it, but we're not going to roll it into this. At the same time, since the study areas are given all the same, I'm looking for a better word than cursory, the same modest level of review, kind of on an equal level. And property owners are also at a point where they can bring a lot more detailed information forward at any step along the way. I would think that if you're a property owner, you should probably be in a pretty big hurry to get detailed information on your property if you don't agree with any of the 3 alternatives and to weigh in. So I would expect that we're going to be hearing some of that over the course of these alternative evaluations.
And as you say, John, property owners and others are certainly welcome to bring other different or more detailed information forward. Please, Bill.
We've, as a group, decided that it's important to preserve Butte County agriculture, and that has a couple of components, like, for example, orchard and field crops. So it's easy to go out into the valley and say, there's rice, there's this much rice, and I can determine what the value is and how it's farmed. But what is grazing land? How many cows per acre do you need? And how many cows do you need to have a viable grazing operation?
These are great questions, and I don't know that I have the answer. I really appreciate your comment because I do want to try and bring the CAC back to this discussion of general principles. And I heard you articulate one, which is that you'd like to see the alternatives that you select preserve agriculture as much as possible, and you see that particularly in rice, in row crops, and in orchard crops, and you're wondering about grazing land.
Yeah, there are 300 acres, I think, of grazing land that you lose along the Skyway or something like that.
And I think it is, and there may be other committee members who want to speak to this and know better than I do.
Yeah, anybody.
My understanding
Steve's here somewhere.
Grazing is often essentially a holding pattern. You run cattle on a piece of property, hoping that you might do something else with it eventually, but I think many of the grazing operations are not hugely economically viable operations in this county. I don't have details. I don't know if there are perhaps some areas that are really that perhaps have their, as you said, as a real estate appraiser would say, highest and best use as grazing. There may be some, but I think in many cases it's a use of the land that creates some revenue, but is not really something that's the primary hope of the property owner.
If I could jump in,
Yeah.
there's a lot of variables. I mean, are you talking about irrigated grazing? How many cattle can you put on it? Is it just winter, range, that kind of thing? There's so many variables to be able to say, yeah, 100 acres is fine or 1,000 acres is not enough. It just depends on the size of the operation, the feed available, the terrain. I mean, there's no simple answer to that question.
And I've looked at a lot of this. I mean, when you talk about 300 acres of grazing land versus 300 acres of agricultural land, in some ways, as a comparative thing, I've dismissed the grazing land in that we're not really a heavy livestock area, at least from what I've seen around people I know that do raise cattle and livestock. And I'd like to hear differently from those in the industry. That we're not the area down south where King City or whatever it is, where 1 acre holds a couple thousand head. So I know this is partly discussion. That's why I'm kind of aiming it this way. But if I had a question, I've kind of disregarded a lot of that, taking it out of use. I almost treat it more as open space. And if you're taking it out of use, I'm thinking more of taking it out of use as open space than I am taking it out of use as grazing land. And the economic impact therefore, I think it's pretty minimal. But when you deal with that, do you actually put as high an assessment of value on it as you would on irrigated or on planted land, agricultural land?
Our assessment of agricultural land and the conversion of agricultural land was based on state designations. And those state designations do tend to put much less emphasis on grazing. So we're looking at state designations of prime and unique farmland, and those designations in Butte County, I believe, are always applied to areas that are growing other crops and that are not grazing lands.
Right, that was in the methodology. I did read that, but I don't think actual values were put out there, so I'm kind of asking a relative.
Well, so that is to say that the valuation we used, which is based on state data, is exactly reflective of the statement you made, Todd, which is that grazing land is not as important as agricultural land in this particular county as is agricultural land used for rice or orchard crops in particular. And I certainly as a general rule, and I think actually in all cases, anywhere that's designated by the state as unique or important farmland in this county is used for non-grazing purposes. It's used in rice, orchard, or in a few cases perhaps row crops or other similar crops.
But is the designation going to be grazing and open lands, or grazing lands or open lands? Again, coming back to where Todd's coming from, I do the same thing he does. If there's no cows on it, it's a big space, very seldom cows on it, then it's an open space and not grazing land.
Well, the then you're asking a question, and I really want to get you all away from asking me questions and talking about principles, but I'll try and answer that. The designations we're looking at are the ones that are on your land use map, and I don't even know them off the top of my head, but you cannot designate a piece of property simply as open space and put no value on it unless it's publicly held. Every private property needs to have an economic use to it. Grazing is an economic use to the land. The name of that designation in the county general plan is
open and grazing.
GOL, grazing and open land. So that is the legal designation, and it is a designation that allows for grazing among a few other things.
And the just final designations here will determine how the land is zoned, right?
That's right.
just one tie up to mine, just real quick. So when I see something removed from grazing land, and because of that sole reason it gets a D, just because it's being removed from grazing land or open space, I've kind of disregarded it if that's the only motivation for downgrading. I've looked at more as the open space issue.
It would not get a D under agriculture. Am I correct, Joanna, that if a piece of grazing land being converted is not rated D, I don't think, in our methodology.
The criteria for the ag impact specifically are on page B37. So if it would allow more than 100 acres of grazing land to be developed, it would get a D. So
okay.
if you choose not to.
It would.
So yeah, converting 100 acres
right.
would give it a D.
Right.
And you know, how many 100-acre grazing lands do we walk by that where there's pretty much no cattle on 90% of it?
Yeah.
Thrown out figure. Made
I
up.
stand corrected.
But,
That is
okay.
the methodology we used. All right. So principles. We've heard one, which is to try and choose alternatives that would minimize conversion of agriculture, and I think a further statement that perhaps minimizing conversion of agriculture might mean really focusing on the rice areas, the orchard areas, and other more active agriculture, that conversion of grazing land perhaps is not as big a concern. So that's one potential principle for at least some people. Jeff, do you have some others to speak about?
Many. In fact, you've thrown a curve at me, because just as I think I'm understanding the process, we go back to what many of our complaints were with this process in the first place, and that was that we were not determining by policy statements in advance what our county should look like. Now, I understand the process. By looking at individual growth areas, by looking at specific land uses, we ought to be able to enunciate policy. My feeling is that we ought to look at what we feel the county should look like in 2030. Establish policies for that, call it a county design, call it whatever you will, and then the land use will follow that design. You heard tonight from the public, and I concur with many of the members of the public, what open space, the concern over growth directed to existing urban areas, the notion of the cost of extension of services, and the reality that services are best provided on the perimeters of existing urban areas where the services already exist. The notion that growth should pay for itself. These are many of the principles that I would think that we would want to enunciate. Many of them are already set forth in our guiding principles. But as we go through this specific growth area by growth area by growth area examination, I think all of us should be governed by the vision that we have for the county in 2030. Do we want the county to continue to look like Butte County? Do we want it to look like Fresno County? What do we want it to look like? And I would hope that it's too late in the process to get back to putting the horse in front of the cart, but I'm hoping that all of us are mindful of the policies that we've guided, that we've set for guiding principles, that as we look at these land use areas, that we say, okay, what does this mean for the county as a whole?
Right. And I just want to clarify that our concern has been and continues to be that if you spent a lot of time trying to enunciate these as policies and get written agreement on all of them before looking at areas, you could spend a very long time doing that. That's why we discouraged you from doing that. That said, I appreciate the comment we heard about agriculture and the comments you've made, because I think they are a good starting point for looking at the individual areas.
I remember the exercise we had with the handheld cameras. We didn't see many pictures of urban areas where we had strip malls and dense housing. We had many pictures of open space, of agricultural areas, of the foothills, of the streams. Let's be mindful of that.
Great, thank you. John?
I think Jeff doesn't really fully appreciate the technical benefits of rear-drive horse-pushed carriages. It tends to make you steer really carefully, since the horse is behind you. And I think what the effect of that is going to be is if people have principles they hold important about how the county should grow overall, and the only way we're going to get there is to arm wrestle over specific study areas, then folks will bring in their ideas about how the county ought to be and how this study area relates to the overall vision of the county. Now, that becomes a difficult proposition if you are dealing with a property owner who's making a very specific case in a very specific location. And I think that what was tossed around quite a bit at the meeting of the Board of Supervisors was, just because you're a study area doesn't mean there's any expectation of entitlement, or there's no threshold that's been established. You just happen to be included in a planning document that controls the growth of the county, which I thought was an amazing leap of faith, but that they wanted to make sure that everybody was really clear that just because you're being studied doesn't mean you're getting anything. So, you know, I take your point, Jeff, but I think what it's going to come down to is that, you know, it's going to get kind of ugly, study area by study area, because we don't have a common idea about what the county's about. Is the unincorporated area of the county is the plan supposed to set up stewardship for the working landscape and open space with development happening in incorporated cities? Or are we going to accept a level of development in a certain pattern, if you can call it that, in and around the unincorporated areas? If we're going to do that on purpose, we should call it out and say we're doing that. And I think Alternative 3 in a lot of these cases does that.
And just in response, I think it's always easier to start with the macro and work your way down to the micro. We're starting with the micro and trying to enunciate the macro. So I
didn't
guess
say it was going to be pretty.
But, and I do, again, I'm trying to make a space here, and we need to move on soon, but let's take a few more minutes. We have heard some overall principles. We heard the one about agriculture. We heard Jeff articulate a number of them about preserving open space, preserving views, thinking about costs of service, centering growth on cities. I think John has largely echoed some of those and has also said that a reminder of a principle the Board of Supervisors set forward, which is that just because it's a study area doesn't mean it has to accommodate growth. So that's a series of principles. I'd like to hear from other committee members either agreement with those that have been articulated or some alternative approaches. Bruce?
Yeah, if you look at all these guiding principles and their shalls and wills, those need to be applied to each one of these and used the best way they can be used, I would think. I mean, otherwise, why have them? I mean, you know, if like under public health and safety, we'll promote the public health and safety and welfare. If an alternative in a study area says that there needs to be 5 more deputies, well, there's no money for 5 more deputies, so that alternative doesn't comply with principle number 8. So I mean, that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
Okay, thank you. And that, if I can restate that, I hear that as a principle that says, at least for community services in particular, don't allow any development that can't be adequately served, and really take that part of the evaluation very seriously.
And the same holds true with all the other principles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you apply each principle to each study area and make your decision based on that.
Right. Okay, thank you. Richard?
I just want to touch on grazing lands. I'm not really the perfect one to talk about it. Steve Lambert would be better. But one thing to remember about grazing lands in Butte County is that they are seasonal grazing lands. And one of the unique things about Butte County for many of the cattle ranchers here is that this is the winter range. And though you may not see any cattle or sheep on the range at any one time, it is still valuable grazing land. And also it has economic benefits that go far beyond just cattle grazing. We talked about grazing and open land. I think the value is of grazing land as open land can't be underestimated also.
Please, Mason.
In regards to a policy or deciding principles on particular parcels, or not parcels, excuse me, growth areas that I know are on 2 maps. Some of these growth areas also sit on cities' growth areas goals. How are we to evaluate, especially as we go forward and I think have a future discussion on housing element, if these get swept up by a city and then that housing element skew is a little bit off, what's our way to weigh those possibilities?
It's a really good question with a very difficult technical and perhaps bogus answer. I mean, the county is in a difficult position in terms of its housing element because every time, under state law, without any other agreements, every time a city annexes a piece of property and develops it, even if it was in the county, it counts towards the city's housing allocation, not towards the county's. The county has a couple of lines of defense there. One is to designate housing sites that are so far away from incorporated cities that the cities will never get them.
Really good for services.
Right, great for service. Another that some counties have pursued effectively has been to actually work with the cities to develop joint agreements that some areas can be counted towards the county's housing allocation, even if they are developed under city jurisdiction. Another is to try and beat the city to the approval of the development so that it can be counted by the county. And certainly another is to work with the LAFCO to try and to work with, on the one hand, with the BCAG to minimize the allocation that comes to the county, to put more of the allocation into the cities, and then if that doesn't work, to work with the LAFCO to try and minimize annexations until after the development occurs so that the county can count them. It's a technical set of things that I mean, I know some people have said, I am encouraging you all to look at this in too much detail. That's a level of detail that I think if you get into, you're really going to have a hard time making sense of this. To me, I'd encourage you to look at just the question of, is this a good place for growth or not? And we'll try and work out the details of how it gets counted towards housing elements later on. But it is going to be hard. It's tricky. Yeah, John.
Well, I think that at a base level, what I would like to propose as a, if not a principle, at least something that it's kind of an elephant in the room, that form follows finance. I think Louis Sullivan said that. But recognizing a situation like complying with a housing element, complying with services and roads and everything else, that these fiscal impacts, there are ways that it gets counted, there are ways that it effectively works, and in some respects we have usually the official fiction and the real deal. And I think that as much as we can make that distinction, it's like, well, look, this is the way that local and state government account for this stuff. This is what's really happening on the ground. Let that factor into the way you grade these things. But back to Bruce's point about the sort of constraints that we see on each one of these study parcels, I think that the principle ought to be that we're recognizing that almost every study area has some level of constraint. And decisions that are going forward for a preferred alternative are going to be about weighing and balancing and figuring out the least bad compromise. You know, so it's like the most unappealing sausage. You know, so as we try to sort out, I'm done with analogies for the entire evening. I'm sorry, because Jason has a hard time keeping up. So if we have a
Dr. Phil.
How's that working for you? Yeah. You can look at some of the maps of study areas and see, oh, it's in the HCP. Well, it's a constraint. Must not be anything getting built there. But the HCP has a mechanism for mitigation so that you can move forward. It's in the recharge. There isn't really a mechanism like that, and it's just sort of in the recharge, and we give it a grade, and we sort of think about it. It's in an area impacted by circulation. What are the trade-offs? How would you fund that? It's an area that needs 5 deputies. You can do it, but you got to fund 5 deputies. So I think that all of these are going to come into probably some hybrids and some mishmash about how do you balance against the constraints. And are the numbers that are being brought forward about the number of units or the areas being considered, can you make that work with the constraints once you got them stacked up? So they're graded. We have an idea roughly where they are. We're going to make some sausage out of it. Sorry.
No more analogies, I promise.
I think what John said earlier, though, was that we should look at the total picture, right? So each of these are rural areas, so you can look at these areas from the view of, do you want to encourage development, further development in rural areas, and apply principles like that aren't written on the sheet, in addition to looking at these constraints. So Concow, do we want to develop a little city in Concow? I don't know. I personally wouldn't favor development in Concow.
Okay. Well, I think Toby wanted to speak. I'm going to watch the time and encourage us maybe after Toby to move on to trying to tackle the first of the study areas. Toby.
I think I have 3 quick questions. The first on the guiding principles, the document that we have here. The number 1 principle is cooperative planning, Butte County working with cities and special districts and unincorporated communities on important regional planning issues. So we're looking tonight at a series of study areas next to the city of Paradise and that area. I guess my question is, what outreach has been done? What specific feedback has been sought from the city of Paradise? And have we received any formal input from the city of Paradise in regard to the county's planning effort? I mean, there's a considerable amount of growth that's being planned on their borders. Have they provided any input to the county on those issues?
Well, of course, it's the town of Paradise, and I get in trouble when I call it the city, so I'll refer to it as the town. The town of Paradise is doing its own specific plan for, I always forget the number, study area 12. Study area 12. That is the area that the town itself has designated for study of potential growth, and one of the alternatives is very similar to what the town is studying there. The town has not particularly been interested in pursuing development along its other boundaries, particularly study area 11 is not one that the town has looked at. Study area, what Magalia is 10, right?
Based on, and I'm sorry, Toby, to jump in.
The Magalia study area is one that really is under county jurisdiction.
That's not I'm sorry, that's not my question. My question is, what are we? We're planning on the border of the town of Paradise, and what are we doing to get their feedback on what they want? That's the question. Okay. Not kind of.
Tim, do we have an official letter or anything from the town?
I don't know if this is on. Yes. A couple things. We had a one-on-one follow-up meeting with the town of Paradise and county, 2 elected officials from the county and town members from their council. We will be receiving, my understanding is, comments from the town still. I talked to Alma Green yesterday, and he said he was putting together some comments to give us the town's perspective. So that will be forthcoming, but we don't have that tonight.
Okay.
But in regards to these things that are going on at exactly the same time, which one's going to trump here? What I mean.
Well, the town of Paradise.
You're saying which comes first? What if these end on the same day?
Of the 5 municipalities in the county, Paradise is the only one that is not currently updating its general plan. The city of Oroville's general plan is well underway. We have alternatives for each of the study areas that's inside of Oroville's planning area that is very consistent with Oroville's general plan, and we're going to be showing you which of those are those alternatives are consistent with the city's general plan when we get to that meeting next week. Chico's general plan is not so far along. I believe that Chico does not have official study areas or official alternatives that they're looking at this point. The city staff in Chico is being given the opportunity to comment, as are Gridley and Biggs, and Gridley and Biggs, I believe, are not even as far along in their general plan processes either. Ultimately, the control actually rests in a way in both general plans. The control for the lands we're looking at is county jurisdiction until the land is annexed by the cities. The cities are free to approach LAFCO to annex the land at the time that they feel is appropriate, provided it's within their sphere of influence. Once LAFCO approves that annexation, then it falls under city jurisdiction. The county and the cities have all stated that they want the 2 general plans, or the county's general plan and the affected city general plans, to be consistent in every way they can, and we're working with each of the individual municipalities to try and achieve that consistency.
Just to quickly follow up, and I didn't mean to take us all the way down that road. It would have been helpful for me to know what the town of Paradise wants on their borders, and frankly wants us to be doing on their borders. It would have been helpful for me, and I guess I would say, for what it's worth, I'm hopeful that before we get to the next Citizens Advisory Committee meetings where we study other areas of the county, we have feedback from those areas, from the elected officials in those areas with regard to the planning efforts. That's fine. And
okay, we will try and get that. I don't know if we can promise it in a week if it's not already done, but we have it from some cities already.
It'd be very helpful, obviously, for the public and for the advisory committee to have that input. The second question is on the guiding principle number 11, sustainability. It says the general plan shall address, identify, and promote ways. I'm wondering, how did the methodology that you put together for analyzing these various study areas incorporate that specific principle? I mean, how are you looking at sustainability in your methodology?
We believe that sustainability underlies all the planning that we're trying to do, and certainly I think that many of you as committee members are trying to do. The sustainability for many of us means preserving open lands, preserving lands that are important for natural resources, for the deer herd, for other biotic resources. It means developing in places that are financially responsible and hence sustainable financially. It means finding alternative solutions for transportation that can give primary or at least additional emphasis to non-vehicular modes such as transit and bicycles and walking. We have evaluated all of those things within the alternatives report we have. The Board of Supervisors, in putting together that policy, has not given a strict definition of what sustainability means. So I think it's really up to each of us to look at the alternatives evaluation report and decide what we think is sustainable. To me, there is a possible way of approaching sustainability really within every one of those subjects, whether it's transportation, fiscal impact, biology, agriculture, all of those, the list goes on. In each case, you can see a more or less sustainable option, and I think those are pretty clear within the report.
I guess my question was it essentially like a variable in the formula that you used for determining the grade for each particular area and study areas? I guess that's more like, I mean, was it actually something that you factored into the final grade that you gave an area? Whether or not it leads to sustain, you know, the
well, we did not give any single final grade. We gave a grade for each of the issues that we evaluated in each study area. I would argue, I think in probably every case, that a grade of A represents a more sustainable approach to that issue than a grade of D. That was, I think, in all cases our intent. Some of you may quibble about whether we successfully achieved that or not, but I think it would certainly be our intent that if you see an A for transportation, that means it has a more sustainable approach to transportation than those that have a D. If you see an A on biotics, it's a more sustainable approach to biotics than those that have a D.
Okay.
Toby, you want the factor, huh?
I just have one question on that
It's a
point.
principle, and we've identified it as a principle, and the board identified it as a principle. So I was curious how we then incorporate that into the methodology.
Toby, if I can just make a quick observation here. For example, in study area 5, Magalia, you give traffic circulation an A. That means it's sustainable. But you have to consider that in the context that there's only one route to and from Magalia. So you have to jump way over here to fire safety where you get a D. So how do you meld those two together?
We have purposely not tried to meld those two together. That's really up for all of you to do. We did not feel it was our place to say whether it's more important to focus development in Magalia because it does have a transportation network, that's why it's got the A, or whether it's more important to avoid new development in Magalia because its access is so poor. That's the thing that your committee has to decide. It was pretty presumptuous of us to give as many grades as we did. We certainly didn't want to try and do a weighting and give an ultimate grade that would have balanced all of those issues together. That's the work that your committee has to do.
Well, they laid it off on the messy proposition that in a democracy we're supposed to argue about conflicting goods. That, yeah, if you look at it this way, it seems to be the way to go, but it's in conflict with this other thing, and now go at it. And that's what we're going to do.
And we're going to start you doing it as soon as you're ready. Toby, did you have a final question?
I don't know how to get to the end point on it. It kind of echoes Jeff's earlier comments about starting macro, going to micro, and concurring with that approach, because that by doing it that way, you would have had more information then to come up with alternatives, 1, 2, and 3, or A, B, whatever, 1, 2, and 3, and then we could have agreed on those alternatives. As it is, we have an alternative 3 that promotes growth in areas that aren't associated with urban areas. And so to me, that it just, the whole alternative 3, in my opinion, doesn't get anywhere near sustained. I don't know how that, it just doesn't make any sense. But I don't know how to fix it, and I don't know how to go back. So,
but we're not here to.
I really appreciate your comment. I just want to say, it's not my place at all to say what you just said. This this time that we've had on our agenda, which is now passed, was exactly the time that I wanted to have you have an opportunity to say that. You've said you see alternative 3 as not sustainable. I think a principle that you would have then is you're looking for more sustainable alternatives like 1 and 2. I'm really glad you've articulated that as a committee member. It's not my place to say that. There are people in this room who feel that some of the development shown in alternative 3 is very appropriate. They have their point of view, you have yours. I want you all to be able to have this discussion and then move forward. What we've tried to do is create the tools for you to have it. I know many of you have wished that you could have first articulated a series of policies. I think had you done that, you would still have some people saying, I have a piece of development land here that I feel meets all these criteria, and you'd still be looking at it. So I know it's trying to have to go through this for some of you, but I think you're very close to being ready. I think maybe a 5-minute break and then we can start doing it. You'll be able to go through these study areas and look at your ideas of what's appropriate, what's not, and make some decisions.
But we're not here to pick 1, 2, or 3. We're to merge each one individually.
For each study area, you're going to pick 1, 2, 3, or something else.
Okay, but
you don't have to choose a single alternative for all 31 study areas, and you don't even have to choose one of the 3 alternatives for the first one we do, which will be study area 5. You can choose a hybrid or a thing we never thought of.
No, I understand. I'm trying to get to Toby's point. We're not here to, on a macro or micro level, we're looking at them individually, so hopefully that helps.
Okay, final comment from Doug.
This is so confusing. I just don't understand how we can look at these guiding principles and go by these guiding principles with each one of these little areas. I can look at a guiding principle here, pick out a number of one that would make every single one of these areas no growth at all. Because it's not going to be sustainable in one case, you're not going to have fire protection in another case, and you're trying to make us pick from one thing over here and one thing over there, just like the gentleman over there spoke, that they're, which is it, fire or growth? I mean,
that's why I'm glad you're a committee member and not me. As John said,
yeah, well, these guiding principles here.
And you, as a committee, in 5 minutes are going to start weighing those competing goods and make a decision based on the.
And we're going to be able to come to a consensus using that method. I'd like to see this. This is going to be fun.
What we may end up with at
we
the
will
City
reconvene
Council,
at 7:30.
At the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors is a committee-wide recommendation that this particular study area is really gnarly and messed up and has lots of competing problems with it, and it's a jump ball for you guys now.
Yeah.
You know, our recommendation is you pick one of these two, but we were divided on that.
Yeah. I don't see how